Good evening, and thank you for joining us. This year is unlike any other year as students and families are dealing with a variety of uncertainties related to COVID-19, including how they will pursue and pay for a post-secondary education in the coming year. It has never been more important for students and their families to do their research on the various student aid options that are available, in addition to deadlines for both admissions and financial aid, as they could change as a result of how schools adapt to COVID-19. For generations, PHEAA has been at the forefront of the Commonwealth's efforts to help families make informed choices about college planning, especially choices that can help them to comfortably afford college while avoiding student loan debt. As Vice Chair of the PHEAA Board of Directors, I'm pleased to see that the agency has adapted to today's new normal in the way it engages with students and families, including virtual financial aid events such as this. While PHEAA has been working with thousands of families through similar events over the past months, this virtual event is a little different in that we will be making a toll-free phone number available following tonight's presentation, so you may privately ask PHEAA student aid experts questions that may relate to your unique circumstances. If you have any unanswered questions at the conclusion of this event, please participate in a one-on-one conversation to make sure you have all the information you need to move forward with your higher education funding plan. So now I'd like to introduce to you Amy Sadi, who is PHEAA's Higher Education Access Partner for Allegheny County. Our presentation will provide you with an understanding of the different financial decisions you need to make concerning higher education, including the costs, the types of aid available, and how to apply for financial aid. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy the presentation. Amy, it's yours.
Thank you so much. All right, so yes, as Senator Fontana mentioned, and thank you again so much for joining us, Senator. We really appreciate you partnering with us to have this event tonight. So I'm going to be covering everything and anything when it comes to financial aid. So my contact information is on the screen for all of you. Like Senator Fontana mentioned, I am the access partner for Allegheny County. So any questions, comments, concerns that you have, definitely reach out to me. You can call me, text me, or email me. My contact is, again, all on the screen. And I'll be sharing this with you at the end of the presentation as well. Also, as Senator Fontana mentioned, we will be having a phone-a-thon following this event. So you can call the number on the screen, which is 1-800-722-8189. The phones will be open from 7 p.m. until 8:15 tonight. So they're not open yet. You have to wait until you hear my presentation. But then you can call starting at 7 o'clock, and they'll close at 8:15. So you can call, and you'll speak one-on-one with a financial aid expert. So one of us at PHEAA will be able to help assist and answer any of the questions you have. I will share this number as well at the end of the presentation. So if you didn't get a chance to write it down, you can write it down at the end and then make your call if you have any questions. Of course, if you do have questions throughout, I do have a Q&A feature available. If you click on that little question mark inside of the box at the bottom of your screen, that'll take you to our Q&A. You can enter any questions you have, and I can try to assist throughout the presentation as well. So feel free to use that feature as well if you please. And we're going to jump right in. So what is financial aid? Well, financial aid consists of funds provided to students and families to help pay for post-secondary educational expenses. Now, you'll notice that the word help is italicized, and there's a reason for that. Rarely does financial aid ever cover the full cost to attend higher education, right? So when you take the cost minus your aid, there's almost always going to be a leftover amount that you're responsible for covering, however you decide to do that. And we're going to be talking about some of those options today. But what is financial aid? So there's three main types. So there's gift aid. So that's our grants, our scholarships, AKA free money, right? That's money that doesn't have to be paid back. Then you have self-help types of aid. So that's our work study program, our savings accounts, our 529s, and I call that our earned money. Because whether you're earning that through work study, or maybe you've already earned those funds and started to put them aside for higher education, that's money that you've earned. And then lastly, our loans. So loans are our borrowed money, right? So that's money that has to be paid back. If we see anything with the word loan on it, just know that that's money you're borrowing now. But again, you're going to have to pay that back in the future. So where does all of this financial aid come from, right? Well, one of the main sources is the federal government. So the federal government provides the federal Pell Grant, federal work study, federal student loans. They also have a federal Parent Plus loan. And then we have the state government. So I work for PHEAA. What is PHEAA? Well, PHEAA is the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency. So we award state grants and special programs to eligible students. Now, on top of the state grant program, which is our most popular program, we also have a state work study program, and we have, which is fairly new, a private alternative loan called PA Forward, which we'll talk about later in the presentation. Then the school or college that you're applying for. So the institution themselves may have their own scholarships, they may have their own grants, and some even have their own loans. So again, this can be another place to be looking for financial aid. And then lastly, scholarships. Scholarships come from so many different sources, businesses, organizations, clubs, schools, you name it. There's probably a scholarship out there for it. And we're going to be talking about scholarships in just a moment. So I worked in a financial aid office previously, and I was a student myself. So I've been through the process. And I know that financial aid can seem daunting and overwhelming, but I'm going to try to make it as simple as I possibly can tonight. And so to do that, I'm going to simplify financial aid into 5 steps. And these are the steps that we're going to be talking about in detail. So step 1, look for free money first. We want to make sure that you're exhausting all of your free money before you start looking elsewhere for aid. Step 2, know your specific deadlines. When it comes to free money, there's always a deadline attached. So you're going to have to keep track of so many different deadlines through this process. So it's important that you keep track of those. Step 3, fill out the FAFSA. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. It is 100% free to complete. And that's really the biggest step that you have to take in order to apply for many different types of financial aid. Then step 4, so after you fill out the FAFSA, you're going to start to receive financial aid notices from schools. And that's going to include what types of financial aid you may be eligible for if you attend that school. So once you start to get those notices, they may come at different times. You're going to need to make sure you compare them and compare them carefully. And we're going to talk about why that's important. And then step 5, be sure you have the money you need. And not just the money for the first year, right? It's one thing to get in the door, to have your first year taken care of, but that second year is going to sneak up on you really quick. And what are you going to do to cover the cost for the second year and your third year and your fourth year and maybe even a 5th year if you need? So you need a plan in place to make sure that you can afford the choice that you're making now for the next 4 or 5 years. So step 1, like I said, look for free money first. So I have a couple of scholarship tips that I'd like to share. So step 1, start searching early, right? It's never too early to start looking for scholarships. So if you're a junior or a parent of a junior, you can start looking for scholarships now. Start asking around. See what other scholarships your friends are applying for. Typically, the scholarships are located at the same link every year, right? They have the same deadline. It's the same scholarship amount, usually the same criteria. So if you see a scholarship your junior year that it's too early to apply for, write that down. Keep track of that and go back to it next year. And the same thing this year while you're searching, if you're a senior or a parent of a senior, you might see a scholarship out there that you'd be interested in applying for, but you need a college GPA or a certain number of college credits. Well, keep track of that scholarship. Go back to it in future years and apply then. Don't just give up. If you get maybe one scholarship or maybe no scholarships this year, don't just give up. Search every single year. There's specifically scholarships out there for sophomores, for juniors, for seniors. So make sure to take advantage of that and look every single year. And also, don't ignore the scholarships with smaller amounts. I can't tell you how many times I've seen students and parents say, well, the scholarship that we found was only $200. And it's not worth our time applying. It's just $200, right? Well, guess what? That's $200 less that you have to spend $200 less that you have to borrow. That's worth it. It's worth applying. Not to mention, a lot of people have that mindset, right? So you probably have a better chance of receiving that $200 scholarship than if you applied for one of, say, $5,000, where you're going to get so many more applicants. So those small scholarships can stack up. So take the time and definitely apply for those as well. And of course, don't forget the deadlines, okay? Like I said, there are going to be so many deadlines that you have to keep track of. When you apply to college, there's probably a deadline for that college. Maybe even depending on what major you want, there might be a specific deadline for you with that major. There's going to be deadlines for scholarships, whether that's institutional scholarships or outside scholarships. So keep track of these deadlines. And one thing I have to say is if you're a procrastinator like me, right, you like to wait till the last minute to do things, if you wait until the night before the scholarship is due to start the application, you may run out of time. Sometimes scholarship applications need you to submit a copy of your transcripts or a copy of all of your involvement at school or a resume. Well, if you waited until the night before and you didn't get that information together ahead of time, you may miss out on that deadline because you didn't start early enough. So what I recommend is when you're keeping track of your scholarships, keep track of not only the deadline, but everything that's needed to be submitted with that application. Do you need letters of recommendation? Do you need transcripts? And keep track of all of that along the way. Now, like I mentioned, the FAFSA, that is a free application for federal student aid. So it is completely free to complete. And for my seniors and parents of seniors, if you haven't started this application, this is a perfect time to start. So it opens up every year on October 1st. So yes, you do have to complete this every year in order to qualify for financial aid. But we're going to talk about the FAFSA and how to complete that. And one of the main deadlines that I want to mention, and this is sometimes one that students like to forget. So, put this in your memory brain, somewhere where you're going to remember year after year. But every year you have to complete your FAFSA no later than May 1st. So for my seniors, parents of seniors, that's this upcoming May, right? May of 2021. So you'd have to make sure you complete your FAFSA by May 1st in order to be considered for the Pennsylvania State Grant. Now there's a little caveat to that. So for my seniors and parents of seniors, since it's your first time enrolling in college, if you're planning to enroll in a community college, a business, a trade, a technical school, a hospital school of nursing, or a 2-year program that's not transferable to another institution, then you technically have this year and this year only until August 1st of 2021 to complete your FAFSA. However, that being said, I don't want anyone waiting that long to complete your FAFSA. I'm going to set a deadline for you right now. I'm going to tell you to have it done by the end of this year. So by the end of December, you want to make sure you get your FAFSA done and submitted. Because in case the institution you're applying for has a deadline, you don't want to miss it. So having it done by the end of this year just means that it's less you have to worry about next year, right? So get that done and I can help every step of the way. Okay, so like I said, the FAFSA, that is a free application for federal student aid. Again, 100% free to complete. Now, sometimes I hear rumors, right? And parents say, oh, well, we don't want, federal student loans, so we're not going to complete the FAFSA. Or we make too much money, so we're not going to do the FAFSA. Listen, the FAFSA is actually applying you for many different things, not just federal student loans. So just by completing the FAFSA itself, you are applying for federal Pell Grant, you're applying for the federal work study program, for federal student loans. We at PHEAA use your FAFSA information to determine eligibility for the Pennsylvania State Grant Program and other special programs. And the school that you're applying for may use your FAFSA information to determine eligibility for need-based grants and sometimes even scholarships. Even some outside scholarships might ask you, have you completed the FAFSA? Whether or not you're eligible for different types of aid, a lot of times they just want to make sure that you've completed the FAFSA, right? That you've taken that step, that you're trying to see what age you're eligible for. So just by saying, no, you haven't completed the FAFSA may mean that you're not going to be even eligible or your application will be even looked at by scholarship committees. So even if you don't think you're going to be eligible for the FAFSA, I still recommend taking the time, make sure you submit it year after year, because you never know what types of aid are going to be out there that you may be missing out on. So how do you do the FAFSA? Well, you would go to fafsa.gov, and you, again, like I said, have to complete it every single year. So every year it opens as early as October 1st. So next October, right, for my seniors and parents of seniors, you're going to be completing the FAFSA again for the following year. So every year on October 1st, you can log on and start that process. Now, in order to complete the FAFSA, you need an FSA account, right? So my students, you're going to have to go to fsaid.ed.gov. You're going to create a username, create a password. You're going to have to enter an email address. And so for my students, I want to let you know, don't use your high school email address. Okay, that address is probably going to be deactivated after you graduate. You don't want to get locked out of this FSA account because your email address isn't valid. So make sure to use a personal email address and make sure it's an address that you're actually checking. You're going to get notifications and updates. And whatever email address you give the schools you're applying for, check your email. That's the only way that these places are going to be communicating with you. So make sure to get all of the communications, right? So be sure you're checking. Once you put in your email address, you can put in a mobile phone number as well. You'll answer some security questions. You'll enter your social security number, and you will have created your FSA account. Now, students, after you create an account, parents, you're going to have to do the same process. So I need one parent in every household to create an FSA account, just like the student. So you're going to go to fsaid.ed.gov. You're going to create a username, create a password. You'll enter an email address. It has to be a different address than what the student used. You'll put in your mobile phone number, answer security questions about yourself, and enter your social security number. So you, the student, will have one account, and you, the parent, will have your own separate account. Now, I want to mention for my parents, because sometimes this gets confusing. If you have multiple students in college, or maybe you have an FSA account previously made because you went to school and you have loans or you have a FAFSA out there, you as an individual can only have one account. So if you've already created an account, right, for a previous student or for yourself, then you would use that same account when you go on to sign your student's FAFSA. So these accounts act as your electronic signature in order to sign the FAFSA application, right? So at the end of the FAFSA. So you need this every single year. So when you create these accounts, make sure you write down this information somewhere where you're going to remember and be able to access year after year. Now, I want to point out, after you create this account, all of your information, your name, your social security number, is going to be shared with the Social Security Administration. So they have to verify that you are who you say you are, right? They're going to verify that your name matches your social security number. As long as everything matches, you're going to get an email, right, to the email address you provided. Usually takes about 3 to 4 days, and it's going to let you know, hey, your account's been verified, you're good to go. Once you get that verification email, that's when you should go on and start the FAFSA process, right? Wait until you get that verification to begin the process. Now, while you're waiting for that verification email, what you can do is you can get some information together. These are things that you're going to want on hand when you start to fill out the FAFSA. So I always recommend to have this prepared, have this ready. Wherever you're going to be completing the FAFSA, make sure you have this documentation. So, of course, you need social security numbers. You also need 2019 tax information. So that's kind of confusing, right? Because it's 2020 and you're looking to go to school next fall, right? So how does that work? Okay. So the FAFSA that you're going to be completing is the 21-22 FAFSA, because you're looking to go to college in the fall of 2021, spring of 2022. So you're going to complete the 21-22 FAFSA. However, the FAFSA uses prior tax year information. So 2 years back from 2021 is 2019. Okay, so you need 2019 tax information. So that would mean you would need your 2019 tax returns and you need your 2019 W-2 forms. So those are those forms you get from your employers at the end of the year. Now, you would need this information for parents and for the student. So student, if you file taxes, we would need your 2019 tax return, just like your parents. Or if you didn't file taxes, but maybe you got a W-2, you had a job, then you'll just need your 2019 W-2 forms. Okay? You'll also need record of any 2019 untaxed income you received, so copies of that, make sure you have the totals. And then you will also need current, so as of the day you file the FAFSA, asset information. So what is asset information? So asset information is how much you have in cash, in your checking, your savings accounts, how much you have in your investments, so any stocks or bonds or 529 plans, right? So your total amount of your assets. Now, you're using 2019 tax information, but asset information is as of the day you file the FAFSA, right? So this day you sit down to do the FAFSA, what is your assets look like? What do they look like? Basically a snapshot of how much money you have, cash, checking, savings, and your investments, okay? So you created an FSA account for the student. You created an FSA account for the parent. You're waiting for those verification emails to make sure your account's been verified. In the meantime, you pulled together all of your 2019 tax information, W-2s, untaxed income, asset information, and then in about 3 to 4 days, you get that verification email. So you know that your account for both the student and parent have been verified. At that point, you can start the FAFSA. Now, I want to point out quickly before we jump right into the FAFSA, when you go to log in, right, it's going to ask you, are you the student or are you the parent? I'm going to suggest to everybody, make sure to select that you're the student. Okay, the student is the one that is going to be filing the FAFSA because they're the ones applying for financial aid. So only the student is going to complete this account and complete this application, right? So sometimes if you select that you're the parent, it can get confusing. Maybe you're not sure who you're answering the questions about, and it can just cause a lot of questions. So make sure you select that you are the student, and then it's going to ask you which FAFSA you're going to file. Again, you're going to make sure you select the 21-22 FAFSA. Once you start the FAFSA process, you're going to answer some questions about the student demographics. That's the first section. Basic things about the student's name, date of birth, address, phone number, simple things. You'll go through that process nice and quick. Then I will bring you to the school selection. So in the school selection, it's asking you to list the college or institution that you would consider attending in the fall. Now, you can list more than one, okay? You can actually list up to 10. So I always suggest list more than one, list a couple, even if you think you know for sure where you want to attend, just list a couple, because the schools that you list on the FAFSA are going to receive this information. And this is how they can process your financial aid notices. If they're not listed on your FAFSA, they're never going to get the information, and they're never going to be able to tell you how much financial aid you could receive if you attended there. So make sure any school that you could potentially consider. So, even if you haven't applied, even if you haven't been admitted, you can still list that school, right? You don't have to wait. That's why you can complete the FAFSA now. So again, make sure you list, up to 10 schools that you're interested in. Now, with the Pennsylvania State Grant, we only receive the top school that you list. And that's okay. Don't panic. Don't put too much thought into it. Once you decide and you know where you're going to be attending, so maybe that's in the spring or early summer, once you make your decision and you know this is the school I'll be going to in the fall, you can go right back to PHEAA.org. You can update your PHEAA state grant, and you can make sure that it has the correct school listed for you. Okay? And I want to point out, too, after you submit the FAFSA, maybe you realize that you forgot a school or you don't want that school to receive your information anymore. You can go back onto the FAFSA and make a change at any point. So if you've forgotten to add a school, you can go back on, you can select make a correction, and you can edit that school list at any time. So after the school selection, you've listed the colleges, then you're going to get to a section about student dependency. Okay, so the FAFSA is trying to figure out, are you the student independent or dependent? Now, FAFSA has their own definition, and it may be different than yours, it may be different than mine, but this is how they determine if a student is independent or dependent. So first they're going to ask your age, right? Earlier in the sections, they're asking your age. Are you 24 years or older? They're going to ask you, are you married, right? What's your marital status? They're going to ask you if you have dependents or children who receive over half of your support, again, as a student. They're going to ask if you're a veteran or serving on active duty, if you are an emancipated minor or an orphan or ward of the court, etc. So they're going to ask you all of these questions. If you're answering and you're not 24 years or older, you're not married, you're not a veteran, you're not on active duty, you're not an emancipated minor, you don't have children or the other dependents, etc. Right? If you're answering no to all of those questions, then FAFSA has determined that you are a dependent student. So you have to list parents' information. So it doesn't matter if your parents don't provide support for you or if your parents don't claim you on their taxes. By FAFSA's definition, if you're answering no to all of these things, then you are a dependent student and you have to report parents' information. Okay? If you're answering yes to one of these, maybe you are an emancipated minor, or you have someone has legal guardianship over you other than your parents. But if you have that and you select that you do have a legal guardian, then just be prepared. The financial aid offices, as well as us at PHEAA, are going to have to request information. We're going to have to verify that you truly are an independent student. So we may ask for court paperwork or documentation to show that you're an independent student. That's okay, but just make sure to have that documentation ready. And when you send it to a school, don't send your official copies, right? Because you're going to have to send these to multiple schools. So make sure you send copies to each of the schools. Now, if you're a dependent student, right, so you're answering no to all those questions, then you have to report parents' information. Well, sometimes it can be confusing about what parents or which parents you need to report. So we're going to break it down, okay? So if you have married parents who live together, so your parents are married, they live together, both parents need to be reported on the FAFSA. If your biological parents live together, so they're not married, but they live together, they would both have to be reported on the FAFSA. If you have legally adopted parents, so your parents have legally adopted you, then they would be listed on the FAFSA. In the case that you have a two-parent household, so two parents are listed on your FAFSA, then only one parent creates the FSA account, and that's the parent that will electronically sign the FAFSA at the end. So it doesn't matter which parent is which one has the account or not, but only one actually has to create the account, okay? Now, in the situation where your parents are divorced or separated, then you would have to list the parent that the student lived with the most over the past 12 months. So the day you sit down to file the FAFSA, who did you live with the most over the past 12 months? Whichever parent that is going to be what's called your custodial parent. Okay, so that's the parent that you list on the FAFSA. Now, I have some parents who will tell me, Amy, listen, we split custody. It's a 50-50 even split. We have an arrangement. The student spends time with us equally, no matter what, okay? Okay, maybe that happens. All right, if that happens, then the FAFSA says, okay, well, which parent provides over 50% of the student's support? So whoever provides the most financial support, over 50% for the student, would be then your custodial parent. Again, that's only in the case where custody is split evenly, right? And in that case, the parent that provides the most financial support would be the custodial parent. Now, when it comes to financial support, that could be things like who provides health insurance, who pays medical bills, who buys school supplies, clothing, food, etc. And if you have questions about this and you're not sure which parent to use, again, you can reach out to me afterwards, or you can call into the phone tonight and someone can help you figure out which parent you should be using. But if your custodial parent, right, so the one reported on the FAFSA, if they are remarried, then you have to list their spouse, so your step-parent, right? You have to list your step-parent's information. So that would mean you would list your step-parent's demographic information, their financial information, and their asset information. So it doesn't matter if your parents weren't married in 2019. If they're married now, you have to report your parents' financial information and asset information for both your parent and your step-parent. Okay? Now, if you have foster parents or legal guardians, they are not reported as your parent on the FAFSA. If you live with anyone else, maybe you live with someone besides your parent, maybe a grandparent, or an aunt, an uncle, a family friend, they do not get reported on the FAFSA. This can be something that I would help you with if you're not sure who to report. So again, you can call me after the presentation or call into the phone-a-thon and we can help. Now, I want to point out, so after you list your parent demographic information, it will take you to the parent financial section. In this section, it's going to ask you, if you want to use the IRS data retrieval tool. So it may give you the option to use this tool. Now, some families, you won't be able to use the tool. So for example, say that you are married or remarried, but you filed head of household in 2019 because at that time you weren't married. So because you filed head of household, but now you're married or remarried, because your marital status doesn't reflect your filing status on your tax return, you won't be able to use the data retrieval tool. So it won't give you the option. And that's okay. That just means you're going to have to manually enter the information. I want to help you, right? If you have questions, if you're not sure how to do this, don't panic, okay? That's the worst thing that can happen. You have help. You can reach out to me, and I can walk you through this whole process, okay? So if you can't use the data retrieval tool, always reach out to me if you have questions. If you can use the data retrieval tool, if it gives you that option, there will be a link that says link to the IRS. I highly suggest using this option. You can click on that link. At that time, it's actually going to ask a parent to log into their FSA account. So it's going to need the parent to log in. And the reason is because it's verifying your information from your FSA account and with the IRS system, right? It's, again, verifying that you are who you say you are. After you, the parent, log in with your FSA account, as long as that information matches, it will bring you to the IRS website. On the website, it'll have your information pre-filled, and it's going to ask you to verify your 2019 address. So you're going to have to put in your address as it was in 2019. Again, this is just another security precaution, another double check to make sure you are who you say you are. So even if you've moved since 2019, you still want to put your address exactly as it is on your tax return. So if you live on Drive, right, you have to make sure, and on your tax return you spelled out the word Drive. And when you're using the data retrieval tool, make sure you spell out the word Drive. It's very particular. Okay, so after you put in your address, as long as it matches, it will give you the option to transfer your tax information right from the IRS, right from your tax return, onto the FAFSA. So it's going to end up answering a bunch of questions for you. And instead of you having to go through and calculate and look at what's your adjusted gross income, what's your taxes paid, those questions will automatically be pre-answered for you. It'll tell you that it was transferred by the IRS, so you know that that information is correct, and it just saves a bunch of time. So if you have the option, I do highly suggest using it. If you don't have the option, it's not the end of the world. You just have to go through and manually answer the questions. After you go through the parent financial section, it will bring you to the student financial section. So my students are going to be asked the same questions as their parents. The only difference is that FAFSA has something called skip logic. Okay, so depending on how you answer certain questions, you may or may not be asked some more. So for example, when it asks you what your if you file taxes, right? If you put that you're not going to file taxes, well, then it's not going to ask you, what type of tax return did you file or what was your tax filing status, because it knows that you didn't file taxes. So students, you're going to be asked basically the same questions as your parents with a couple tweaks in between. But then you will have to go through and then you will answer all of those financial questions about yourself. And if you have questions, if you're not sure, are you answering these questions about you, the student, or about you, the parent, it can get confusing. But there is a blue banner at the top on every single screen, and it says either student information or parent information. So double check that banner on every page. Make sure that you're answering the questions about the correct person, whether it be the student or the parent. Okay? After you get through the student financial section, it will bring you to the sign and submit page. I do want to point out there was a great question asked in the Q&A. when it asks about investments, is that asking about retirement accounts? It's not asking about retirement accounts. So retirement savings plans, such as your 401k or your 401b, are not reported on the FAFSA. So that's a great question. Okay. But then again, it'll bring you to the sign and submit page. So you've completed all of the previous sections. You've gotten to the last one. And now it's telling you that a signature is needed for the student and for the parent. Now, like I said, your FSA account is how you electronically sign. That acts as your electronic signature. So first you would click Provide Student Signature. It'll bring you to a page. Now, because you followed my advice earlier, right, and you listened to Amy, right, you've already logged in as a student. So the student's already put in their FSA account username and their password to log into the FAFSA, right? So because they've already logged in, they will literally be able to just click Sign and Submit, right? Well, excuse me, just sign. Not submitting yet, not without a parent signature. They will just be able to hit Sign. Once the student has signed it, it will bring them back to this page. It will show that it's been electronically signed by the student, and then you can click Provide Parent Signature. So parents, you can click that. It'll bring you to the next screen. If you've logged in already to use that data retrieval tool, you will be able to do just what the student did. Hit Sign and come back to this page. If you haven't logged in already, that's okay. It'll just ask you to log in at that point. So it'll ask you to put in your username and your password that you created, and then hit Sign. After you've signed it, so it's brought you back to this page, it shows you that it's been electronically signed by the student, it's been electronically signed by the parent, then there will be a Submit button. That's when you can submit the FAFSA. So you don't want to submit it until it's been signed by the student and parent. If it's missing one of those signatures, your FAFSA will be rejected. Now, what does that mean? That means it's basically on hold. Financial aid offices can't do anything with that information without the signature. Okay. I want to point out, though, if you're having issues electronically signing, you've tried everything, the account's not working, it's not letting you in, you're really frustrated, there's one other option when you click Provide Parent Signature. There's a box at the bottom left that says Other Options to Sign. The second option is to print a signature page. This will allow you to actually physically print a piece of paper out that it has all the information on it. There will be a line for you to sign. So you'll sign on that line, and then there's instructions of where to mail it. So you're actually going to mail it directly to FAFSA. Takes a few weeks, they'll receive that information, they'll process the signature, and then your FAFSA will go from rejected to official. Okay? So that's the only reason you wouldn't sign electronically is if you're printing the signature page, signing it by hand, and mailing it to the FAFSA. Now, after you've signed, you've hit the Submit button, it'll bring you to the confirmation page. Now, everyone gets super excited when they see the confirmation page, and I've seen this happen. Folks get so excited, and then they just X out of the screen, right? You're like, I'm done, perfect, boom, done, click out. Don't do that yet. Don't get too excited, because there's a link at the bottom of this screen that takes you to the Pennsylvania State Grant application. So it'll bring you right to the state grant application. So it'll take you to PHEAA.org. It'll take you actually through, it's called AESsuccess.org. That's our portal. So don't worry when you see that link. It'll take you to AESsuccess.org, and you'll be able to complete the state grant application right then and there. Now, this application is only done one time. So you're only going to do that application this year, right? You won't have to do that year after year. After you've done the application this year, in the future years, all you need to do is just fill out the FAFSA itself. Okay, now our application, because we use a lot of the information from the FAFSA, our application is really quick and easy. So it's not going to take you very much time at all to complete. So I do recommend use that link, go right to the state grant application and complete it while you're doing the FAFSA. If you have issues, if the link doesn't work for you, or the link's not there, or you get excited and you X out of the screen too quick, don't panic, right? Within about a couple of days, 4 or 5 days after your FAFSA has been processed, you can then go directly to PHEAA.org. You can create an account and you can complete the state grant application at that time. So, again, if you can't do it right away or it doesn't work for you, you can always do the state grant application at a later point. You do have to wait about a week in between, right? You can't go on the next day and do it. We need to make sure that your FAFSA has been received by us at PHEAA, been processed by us first, your FAFSA, and then you'll have the option to do the state grant application. So after filing the FAFSA, like I said, your information is going to be shared with us at PHEAA, and then it's going to be shared with all of the colleges that you've listed. And then in a few days, you're going to receive what's called the Student Aid Report, or the SAR report. And it's actually going to be emailed to the student. So again, students, this is why you have to check your email. You're going to receive that Student Aid Report. Basically, it's just a regurgitated FAFSA, right? It's a lot of the same information you've already entered onto the FAFSA. But look through that Student Aid Report. Make sure everything looks correct. Make sure you've answered everything as it should be, right? Sometimes seeing it laid out like that is easier to see it, and you can verify that you've entered everything correctly. As long as everything's been entered correctly, then you can file that SAR report away. You don't need it anymore. Now, I want to point out, some things may have changed, right? You're using 2019 tax information. It's now basically the end of 2020. Your taxes could look totally different, right, than they did in 2019. So if there's been, a drastic decrease in income since 2019, or after you filed a FAFSA, right? Maybe your parents are married now, and then in July, something happens and they get separated. If there's a drastic change, then you could reach out to the financial aid offices and ask them about a special circumstance appeal. Depending on the change, they're going to ask you for some more information. If there was a decrease in income, they may ask you for your 2020 taxes after you file them. They may ask for end of the year, 2020 W-2s, etc. If the marital status changed, they may ask for proof of separate addresses. Right, each school is going to be differently. They're all going to handle this process differently. But reach out to the schools. Ask them what the process is. When do they start reviewing special circumstances? What information do you have to submit? And then you would have to work with each school individually. Right, so just because you send your information to one school, they process the appeal, maybe it makes a difference to your aid. That change is only valid at that one school. That's why you have to work with all of the schools individually. Send them all an email, tell them about your situation, and then see what they say and work with them individually. Now, I did want to point out, some schools require what's called the Css Profile. This is the College Scholarship Service Profile. Now, this is something on collegeboard.org. There's actually a list of all of the schools that require this. There's about 400 across the U.S. that do require this profile. This profile does not replace the FAFSA. So if you're applying to a school that requires the CSS profile, you still have to complete the FAFSA. But then in addition to the FAFSA, you would complete the CSS profile. Now, there is a cost to complete the profile, and there's a separate cost for each school that requires it, because each school has their own profile. So say you're interested in attending maybe 5 schools, you're applying to 5 schools, 3 of them require the CSS profile, then you would be completing 3 profiles, 1 for each school. Okay, so again, you can check collegeboard.org if you have questions. There's actually a really nice chat feature. You can always send a chat in or call them if you have questions. But again, 400 schools, about 400 across the U.S. require this. And the list is right on collegeboard.org if you're not sure if your college requires this or not. This would be something, again, that's done separately, and schools may have a deadline for when you need to complete this profile. This is how some schools award their institutional aid. Basically, the profile is going to be a more in-depth FAFSA, right? They're asking more questions about your finances and assets and all that. So, it might be a little bit more time consuming. So make sure, again, you carve out time to complete this process and make sure it's done by the deadline. All right. So after you complete the FAFSA, you're going to get that student aid report. You're going to verify everything looks good. And what's going to happen is your FAFSA is going to take all of the information you submitted, right? So all of those questions you answered, and it's going to take all that information and calculate it into this one number. That number is called your EFC, your expected family contribution. So this is in FAFSA's eyes, the amount that you, the student, and you, the family, should be able to contribute to the cost of higher education. Now, this does not mean that this is how much you're going to have to pay. This is not how much you're going to have to owe. I can't tell you how many times I have families call me in a panic saying our EFC is ridiculously high, we can't afford this amount, or on the other side, our EFC is 0, which is the lowest. Does that mean we won't owe anything? No. Okay, your EFC is not tied to the amount that you're going to owe at the institution. What the EFC does is two things. One, it tells the school if you're eligible for a federal Pell Grant. It's one of the federal grants. Two, it tells the school how much financial need you have, if any. Okay? To calculate financial need, they take the cost of attendance. So the cost of attendance could be different for every school, right? And that's their average cost. And that includes direct and indirect costs. So that's things like tuition and fees, room and board, but it also includes things like books and supplies, transportation costs, miscellaneous expenses, etc. Cost of attendance is higher usually than your direct cost. So I previously worked in financial aid. Our cost of attendance was about, $3,000 or so higher than the actual billed cost for our students that lived on campus. That's a big difference, okay? So they're going to take that cost of attendance. They're going to subtract out your EFC. Now your EFC stays the same no matter where you go to school. So that EFC is the exact same at every school, but the cost of attendance could vary. So if the cost of attendance is higher for one school, your financial need may be higher because they take the cost of attendance, subtract out the EFC. The difference tells them if you have financial need, and if so, what that financial need is. That's going to help them in awarding different types of aid, which we're going to talk about. I did see a question come in about the slides. Yes, I'm actually recording tonight's presentation, and I'm going to be sending the recording and a copy of the presentation slides to all of the attendees tomorrow. So tomorrow you will receive an email from me, so you'll have my contact info, and it will have the recording and the presentation slides available for you. So don't feel like if you miss anything that it's, too late and you have to, figure it out on your own. I will make this available to all of you afterwards. All right, so first I wanted to mention the Pell Grant. So like I said, your EFC tells the school if you're going to be eligible for a federal Pell Grant. So first they're going to look and see if you have an EFC of 0, which again is the lowest, up to an EFC of about 5,700, then you would qualify for a federal Pell Grant. The maximum award, so if you have a 0 EFC for this current year, for my college students right now, the maximum award that they could receive is around $6,300 for the year. So if you have a 0 EFC, that's the maximum Pell you could receive. And that is the same again, no matter where you go to school. If you go to school in-state, out-of-state, private school, state school, community college, etc., the Pell Grant is the same. It doesn't vary. If you have the EFC up to the maximum, which is around 5,700, then your Pell Grant for the year would probably be around 600 or so for the year. So the Pell Grant ranges from around 600 up to 6,000, depending on what your EFC is. If your EFC is above that 5,700, then you won't qualify for the federal Pell Grant, right? So you wouldn't have enough eligibility for the federal Pell Grant. But you may have financial need. Schools use that financial need figure to determine, 1, if you're eligible for federal work study, and 2, if you're eligible for a federal subsidized loan, which we're going to talk about. But I want to mention quickly what federal work study is. It always causes questions. So if you are eligible for federal work study, your school will include that on that financial aid notice that they're going to send you. And they'll say, federal work study, and they'll give you an amount. The amount that they list, maybe it's $2,000, maybe it's $3,000. That is the maximum amount that you could earn if you participate in federal work study. So in order to participate for federal work study, you have to find a position that's available, usually online, through their portal or something. You'd have to apply for the position, maybe conduct an interview with the supervisor, and then you'd have to get selected for the position. If you get selected for the position, you'd work with the supervisor, you'd create a schedule, you'd begin working. in the fall. And then every week or every 2 weeks, whatever it is, you'll get a paycheck for every hour, for every week or so for all the hours that you worked. So it's similar to an off-campus job, right? You're going to get a paycheck just like you normally would. That money is yours to do what you want with it. If you want to save it for next semester, if you want to go buy pizza with it, that money is yours, but it's not applied to your bill. So when you see that on your financial aid notice, if you're eligible, again, that just means you're eligible. Don't take that amount and subtract it from how much you're going to owe, because it does not get applied to your bill. Typically, work study is very competitive too. So just because you're eligible does not mean it's guaranteed to you. You still have to apply and you have to be picked for that position. Now, there's another grant, right, the Pennsylvania State Grant that I mentioned, that you may be eligible for. So I want to mention Pennsylvania, we do it a little bit differently with our state grants. We do take into consideration the cost of the institution. Okay, so the higher the cost of the institution, the higher your final maximum award could be. Right, so these award amounts do vary, anywhere from $2,400 to about $4,500, depending on the cost of your institution. Right, so the chart is on the screen for you to view. The minimum award is $500 if you're eligible, and it can range anywhere from $500 up into the maximum award amount. Right, so it can vary depending on your eligibility. Now, I want to point out, if you're considering going to school in out of state, right, so a different state than Pennsylvania, well, you may still qualify for a PA state grant. So we have reciprocal agreements with the following states, with Delaware, DC, Massachusetts, Ohio, Vermont, and West Virginia. So if you attend school in one of those states, you may still qualify for a PA state grant. However, the PA state grants for our reciprocal states, the maximum award for this current year is around $578 for the year. So you'll notice that's lower than the maximum award amounts if you attended school here in Pennsylvania. So it's definitely something that you should consider. But just because you're looking to go to school out of state doesn't mean you shouldn't do the FAFSA, and doesn't mean that May 1st deadline, doesn't matter, right? You still want to make sure if you're going to school out of state that you can complete your FAFSA every year by May 1st in order to be considered for the Pennsylvania State Grant. Now, on top of the Pennsylvania State Grant, we do have other state programs. So on this page, like I talked about, we have a state work study program, we have a blind or deaf beneficiary grant, we have an educational assistance grant for our National Guard. On this next screen, there's even more. We have a Pennsylvania Targeted Industry Program grant, we have a Ready to Succeed scholarship, and almost all of these have a separate application. So almost all of these, you have to go on to PHEAA.org and apply. So take a look at these. I don't have the time to spend tonight to go through each one, but go to PHEAA.org. You can take a look at all of these different programs and see if it could be another thing that you may be eligible for. So take a look, and again, most of them do have a separate application process, so you may have to submit another application. I do want to mention with the FAFSA that just by completing the FAFSA, if you are a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, regardless of your financial need, it doesn't matter how much your parent or you make, you will qualify for a federal student loan. Okay, regardless of need. Now, these federal student loans are in the student's name. There's no credit check. There's no cosigner required. These loans have a fixed interest rate. So for this current year happening right now with our college students, the interest rate is 2.75%. That's a fixed rate for the life of the loan. There's no payments required while you're in school and for up to 6 months after you graduate. And there's flexible repayment plans once you graduate. And there are two types of federal student loans. So the first is a federal subsidized loan. I call that the sub loan. The other is a federal unsubsidized loan, or an unsub loan. So what's the difference? The federal subsidized loan is based on financial need. So you have to have financial need by that calculation, cost minus EFC, right? You have to have leftover financial need to qualify. But if you do, and you accept the loan, right, it's up to you as a student if you want these loans, But if you accept them, no interest will be charged to that loan while you're in school and during that 6-month grace period. So if you accept that loan when you graduate, it will still be the same amount. It wouldn't have gotten any larger. The unsubsidized loan is not need-based, so anyone can qualify for this loan. And the difference is that interest does accrue on the loan while the student's in school. So that loan, the interest does accrue while you're in school. It does accrue during your grace period. And so any interest not paid during that time will be capitalized at the start of repayment. So neither of these loans require payments while you're in school, but with the unsubsidized loan, because the interest is accruing, if you have the means, I do suggest make payments, at any time for any amount, just to help keep that interest down. Okay? Both of these loans do have about a 1% origination fee that gets taken right off the top. It is only about 1%, so honestly, most people don't even notice, but I do like to tell you that happens. And then I want to show you this chart, okay? So if you are a dependent undergrad student, first-year student, right, so for my seniors, parents of seniors, the maximum that you can borrow in a federal student loan next year is $5,500 for the year. Again, it doesn't matter where you go to school, in-state, out-of-state, private school, community college, etc. That amount is the same. That limit is the same no matter where you go to school. Of that $5,500, up to $3,500 could be offered as a federal subloan if you're eligible, right? So if you're eligible by your financial need calculation, then the school would offer you $3,000 in a subloan and then the difference of $2,000 in an unsubloan, totaling $5,500. Maybe you don't qualify for the full $3,500, so maybe they're going to offer you, let's say you qualify for $1,000. Then they would offer you a $1,000 subloan, and the difference of $4,500 would be offered as an unsubloan. Or maybe you don't have any financial need, and they would offer you the full $5,500 in an unsubloan. Okay? Again, it's up to you if you want to accept, reduce, or decline those loans. After your first year, your second year, you would be offered $6,500 for the year. And then your third and fourth year, you would be offered $7,500 for the year. So the loan amounts do increase slightly year after year. Now, like I said, after schools start to receive your FAFSA information, they're going to start to process your financial aid notices. Now, these, again, will happen at different times. Some schools might start processing these as early as December. Others may not process these notices until January or February. And there's no standard format of what they have to require. So some may include federal loans, some may not. Some may include if you're eligible for a scholarship, what the criteria is. Is it a one-time scholarship or is it renewable? If it's renewable, what do you have to do in order to maintain that year after year? Is there a GPA requirement, number of credits, a specific major you have to be? It's going to include, it's going to explain, is this a grant? Is this a loan? What steps are required in order for your loans to pay in the fall? So make sure you're reading these notices. They have lots of valuable information for you. Now, again, like I said with the cost of attendance, that's direct and indirect costs. Tuition, fees, room and board, books, supplies, transportation, miscellaneous expenses, etc. If one school on their notice shows you the cost of attendance minus your financial aid equals how much you owe, and another school uses direct costs, right? So if you're living on campus, that would be tuition, fees, and room and board only, right? They're not taking into consideration the rest of the costs. So if they show you direct costs only, minus your aid and how much you owe after that, if you compare those two, you're not actually comparing them equally, right? It's not an even comparison because one school is using cost of attendance, one is using direct only costs. So you want to make sure you're comparing apples to apples, right? If one school is using cost of attendance, use the cost of attendance for the other school. You can always go on their websites and figure out what that is to get an idea of how much you might have to pay for that first year. And taking into consideration the indirect cost is important. How are you going to pay for books and supplies? What about parking passes or gas? Wear and tear on a car. How are you going to come up with those types of costs? So it's really important to make sure you're comparing these notices carefully. These little things are just a couple of questions that you can take into consideration as you can compare the notices carefully. And then step 5, be sure you have the money you need. Have you made an affordable choice? Can you afford what's not covered by financial aid? And what are you going to do to cover that? 2 options that we see families go through. The first is a federal direct plus loan. This is a loan in the parent's name. Okay, so it's a parent loan. The parent would apply. It does require a credit check, so your credit will be run. It's not as much about your credit score or your credit history, but really the application is looking for any adverse credit, any bad credit that you have. So sometimes it's easier to be approved for the Parent Plus loan than the next option I'm going to talk about. I do want to mention, though, if a parent applies for the Parent Plus loan and they're denied, so their application is denied, then the school can offer the student an additional $4,000 in an unsubsidized loan. That's the kind that accrues interest while you're in school. So that loan, again, if your parent is denied, that is the only way to receive more in a federal student loan, is by having a parent apply and be denied for the Parent Plus loan. Now, these Parent Plus loans do have a fixed interest rate. This current year, I believe it's 5.3%. That is the lowest it's been in a very long time. And the rates do change for all of the federal loans every year on July 1st. So that current rate right now may be different next fall when you're looking to attend. So make sure to check what the interest rate is next July when you're applying. You would not start applying for this option or the next one until next summer, right? It's way too early to start applying. You can start thinking about which option might be best and looking into the options, but definitely don't start any applications right now. Just like I said, so it has a fixed interest rate. This year it's 5.3%. When you're applying, you can select to defer payments until after graduation. However, the interest does accrue on this loan while the student's in school. So that interest will be accruing year after year. So again, if you have the ability, making payments on that loan while the student's in school of any amount at any time is available and can really help you save a lot of money after the student graduates. Now again, this loan is in the parent's name for the life of the loan. So that's one thing to consider as well. Sometimes parents don't realize that, but yes, for the life of the loan, it's in the parent's name. Oh, and the last thing I forgot to mention about that Parent Plus loan is that the Parent Plus loan has an origination fee, just like the student loans, which is about 1%. The Parent Plus loan origination fee is about 4%. So it's right around 4.2%. So about 4% comes right off the top of that loan, and you're going to be paying interest on those fees, even though you never saw that money. So that's one thing about the Parent Plus loan. It's one of those fine print things that you really want to make sure you're aware of and you understand. Now, the other option is a private alternative loan. Now, these private alternative loans are usually in the student's name. 90% of the time it's in the student's name. And 99.9% of the time, the student is going to require a co-signer or a co-borrower on that loan. So there is a credit check. The interest that you're offered varies, from lender to lender and based on the student and co-signer's credit score and debt to income ratio. Right? So you can fill out the application and see what kinds of interest rates you're getting. But before you even apply, check on their websites. Check to see what the ranges are. Check to see what the fine print is. A lot of these lenders have different fine print agreements. You want to make sure you really understand what it's going to be like to have this loan, pay it back in the future, and all of the fine print in between. Now, usually these private alternative loans do not have the origination fee like the Parent Plus loan. And I have seen families who get better rates with the private alternative loans than they would with the Parent Plus loan. But again, it depends on your interest, on your credit, because that impacts your interest. It's also going to impact your interest based on what type of repayment plan you select. So are you selecting to pay right away, to make interest payments right away, or are you trying to defer until after graduation? Repayment plan you select will also impact the interest you're offered. And if you select a variable versus a fixed rate, that can also have an impact. So there are a lot of things to consider. So again, it's too early to start applying, but you can always take a look into these loans at any time. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Pennsylvania, we do have our own private alternative loan. It's a fairly new program. It's called PA Forward. We usually see, again, that these students are the ones that these loans are in the student's name, right? So the student's applying and then having a parent or a guardian or somebody co-sign on that loan for them. It doesn't have to be a parent, so there's that flexibility there. And these loans are for Pennsylvania residents who attend any school. So even if you're going to school out of state, you could still apply for a PA Forward loan. You can go to PHEAA.org/PA Forward for more information. This is just another option for you, right? It may not be the best one. We may not offer you the best interest rate. A private alternative loan might not be better than a Parent Plus loan. So you have to compare all of your options and see what's going to give you the best rate. I will say that I do believe in our PA Forward loans. I do believe we have the best fine print, right, when it comes down to the finer details. I do think you will find some valuable things when it comes to PA Forward, but I still want you to check all of your options, right? Just because I'm saying PA Forward doesn't mean it's the best. So definitely look into all of the options that are out there. Don't just go with that one just because. Make sure it's the best for you. So what can you do now? Apply for the FSA account, right? Have one for your student and one for you as the parent. Visit college websites. Start talking about what's affordable. Students, you can't do this without your parent. Parent, your students can't do this without you. You need to have these conversations and don't wait until the college bill comes out, right? And you figure out how much you're going to owe. Don't wait to talk about it till then. Have those conversations now. Start figuring out, what are you going to do? Are you going to try for the Parent Plus loan? Are you going to try for a private alternative loan? Who's going to co-sign for you? How much do you have to borrow? And can you afford to do that for 4 or 5 years? It's important to have these conversations. I know it can be uncomfortable, but you have to do it. Use net price calculators. Before you even get those financial aid notices, you can use net price calculators to figure out roughly how much you may owe and get a head start, right, on starting those conversations. And then, of course, explore scholarships. With those net price calculators, I want to mention, if you go to collegecost.ed.gov, you put in some general information. The schools you're looking at, each one should have, or most of them have, a net price calculator, and it can tell you roughly how much you may owe, how much aid you may receive, to give you an idea, so you don't have to necessarily wait for those notices. Things to consider: your return on investment. Higher education costs are increasing every year. We hear it all the time, right? It's expensive to go to school. So make sure you're getting the best of your investment. You are investing this money in your future. Make the best choice for yourself. Is your major choice realistic based on how much you're borrowing? Are you going to be able to afford back these loans in the future? Do you have an idea of what your expected salary might be in the future once you graduate with that major? What are the employment demands in that field now? And what do they look like in the future? And what are your options depending on where you want to live, whether you want to live in a city or a rural area or a different state? What does that look like? If you go to mysmartborrowing.org, you can get a good idea of these different types of things and start thinking about your return on investment. It's a great tool that can really help you start having those conversations and start thinking ahead to make sure that you're not over borrowing and that you're going to be able to afford what you're borrowing now. Ways to reduce your financial aid, right? Or ways to reduce how much you have to borrow, right, in terms of loans. So graduate on time. When it comes to the Pennsylvania State Grant and your federal loans, these all have limits, right? So the Pennsylvania State Grant, you can only borrow that for up to 8 full-time semesters. That's 4 years. If you have to stay an extra semester, an extra year, you won't be able to receive any state grant. Your federal loans can run out too. There's a limit on how much you can borrow. If you check out that slide I showed a little while ago about how much you can borrow each year. If you have to stay an extra year, you won't have the regular amount to help cover the cost. That means you're probably going to have to look for more private alternative loans or more Parent Plus loans. So earn college credits in high school, research the right major, 2+2 or 3+2 strategies. You go to a community college that's transferable for 2 years, and then you transfer to a 4-year program for the last 2 years. that can save so much money in the long run, right? 3+2 strategies, that's where you go to a school that offers a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in 5 years. Again, that can help save on costs. Consider commuting or leaving your car at home if you have a car. Just to live on campus, the cost is like around $10,000 to $12,000, right? So if you live on campus for 4 years, that could be upwards of $40,000 that you need to come up with, right? Of course, financially it can help with that, but what if it doesn't, right? What if it's just helping to cover the tuition costs? You're going to be paying that out of pocket, right? So consider your options. I know students hate when I say that, but commuting can save you so much money in the long run. Choose your meal plan carefully. If you're not using the meals that you're paying for up front, ask to see if you can change that meal plan or change it for the next semester. Don't pay for meals that you're not even using. And lastly, buy used or rent textbooks. And let me tell you, the used textbooks go quick. Everyone wants to spend less on textbooks, right? So if you wait until the day classes start to go buy your textbook, all of the used ones are probably going to be gone. And you're going to be stuck paying double the price for that textbook. And the same thing too with online textbooks. So your college campus store probably doesn't have the best costs, right? They probably have the best prices. So look everywhere. Look online, use different sites, figure out what's offering you the best price, and search early. Again, even online, those used textbooks go quick. So be sure you're hunting for a deal, right? Don't just take the first option again, right? And then use your resources. On the left-hand side are some resources I've talked about tonight and some that I didn't have time to mention, but that can be helpful. On the right-hand side are free scholarship search sites. So these sites are not endorsed by us at PHEAA. They're not affiliated with us at PHEAA, but these can be a great place to start your search process for scholarships. I can't tell you how many times I have parents reach out and say, hey, my student's involved with XYZ or they're in this major. Do you know any scholarships out there for them? I wish I could keep track of that. I wish I was a scholarship encyclopedia, but I'm not, okay? So if you're unsure about scholarships, look at these websites. Most of them have a search bar. Go into the search, type that activity or that hobby, type that major in, and see what options come up, right? Start looking. That's the best way to go through them. And you can use all of these sites. It's not like one is going to cover all of them for you. Okay, so this is just a great place to start. And again, I'm going to send the recording and these PowerPoint slides out to all of you tomorrow. Social media. So we're out there on social media. So if you follow us on Facebook or Twitter, we do different programs every Friday about different programs that we offer, ways to save, how to make college more affordable. We promote different activities that we do. So follow us on social media for more information. My presentation surely did not cover everything when it comes to financial aid, but our social media does a great job of promoting the different activities and events and, again, ways to save. So follow us, of course, on social media for more information. Like I said, my name's Amy Saudi. I'm the Higher Education Access Partner for PHEAA. So I cover all of Allegheny County. So any questions, comments, concerns you have, please call me, text me, email me. I'm happy to help. And I did want to share with you again about your questions. So tonight, it's a one-night-only phone-a-thon. So if you call the number on the screen, 1-800-722-8189, we have a bunch of financial aid specialists waiting by, all at PHEAA, ready to answer any of the questions that you have. So the phone lines are open. So they've been open since 7, and they're going to close at 8:15 tonight. So please, if you have questions, you can throw them in the Q&A. I did see a question I'm going to answer in just a moment. But if you would prefer not to use the Q&A, it's easier to speak over the phone. Whatever the case, definitely call our number. This is one of our first times doing this event, so hopefully we can help answer all of the questions that you have. So I do want to thank all of you for joining, and I do want to thank Senator Fontana again for partnering with me to offer this program to all of you. I hope that we were able to answer all of your questions, and if you need, again, utilize the phone-a-thon.